In a world where secrets are traded behind innocuous smiles and false pleasantries, betrayal can strike from the unlikeliest of places. Picture a busy airport terminal on a warm afternoon, bustling with passengers eager to take to the skies. A single flight attendant's lingering glance lands on a confident black woman who carries herself with a quiet, almost imperceptible authority. Within moments, tensions spark, and an unexpected turn of events sets them on a collision course. Unbeknownst to the flight attendant, the woman is an undercover CIA agent on duty. And by the end of this journey, karma will enact its heavy toll. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows of Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, capturing dust motes suspended in the air like tiny galaxies. It was midday, and the terminal teemed with restless travelers from every corner of the globe. Lines snaked around check-in counters, children dozed on parents' laps, and the coffee kiosks did a brisk trade in frothy lattes and bitter espressos. Passengers clutched passports and boarding passes, eyes darting between the overhead screens and the gate numbers. 30-year-old flight attendant Veronica Myers navigated the scene with a forced smile. She had been awake since dawn, her early morning routines leaving her weary and short-tempered. Veronica's dark hair was pulled back in a neat twist, her lips colored a faint rose. Her uniform was perfectly pressed. She took pride in her appearance, even as stress simmered beneath the surface. Over the years, she had learned how to mask her feelings behind a veneer of courtesy. She was heading to Gate 53B, assigned to a flight bound for Washington, D.C. The day promised to be long and hectic, a typical scenario in her line of work. Yet there was something more, some intangible friction that seemed to hum in the air around Veronica. The airline she worked for, American West, had merged recently with a larger carrier, leaving employees anxious about job security. Rumors abounded about layoffs and corporate shuffles, fueling a swirl of gossip among the flight crews. Amid the hustle, Veronica's attention snagged on a tall, elegant black woman standing near the gate. She wore a sleek, charcoal grey pantsuit, her hair cropped close, with a subtle fade on the sides, an immaculate, professional style. The woman's posture hinted at quiet confidence. She balanced a slender carry-on on one shoulder while studying her phone with intense focus. There was a hardness in her eyes, a readiness. Veronica felt an irrational twinge of annoyance. Perhaps it was the way the woman seemed so self-assured, or how she seemed to command the space around her. Veronica found herself thinking, who does she think she is? The question sparked a mild sense of outrage in her mind, though she struggled to pinpoint its source. At that moment, the woman glanced up, catching Veronica's stare. Their gazes locked for a brief, tense instant. Veronica felt an odd chill shoot up her spine. She quickly looked away, adjusting the knot of her scarf, then continued her march to the staff area behind the check-in counters. Unbeknownst to Veronica, the woman's name was Aaliyah Washington. She was no ordinary passenger. She was an undercover CIA operative tasked with ensuring the safe passage of a vital intelligence package that was set to meet her in Washington. For now, Aaliyah was simply another face in the crowd, but her entire being was poised for action. She had clocked Veronica's scrutiny and filed it away under potential threat, her mind on constant alert. The stage was set. The plane would soon be ready for boarding, and two fates, vastly different, were about to collide. Aaliyah Washington had developed a particular skill set over the years, one that allowed her to blend seamlessly into almost any crowd. She could switch languages as swiftly as changing outfits, handle complex firearms, and decode ciphers scribbled hastily on napkins. But her most prized ability was the subtle art of perception. She noticed details others missed, the slight shift in a traveler's gait, the tension in a flight attendant's forced smile, the suspicious weight in someone's carry-on. Today, those skills were on full display. In her line of work, intense observation was second nature. While she waited for the boarding announcement, Aliyah stood near gate 53B, appearing engrossed in her phone. The truth was, her senses were on high alert, assessing every angle. She felt the weight of an envelope in her inside blazer pocket, documents crucial to an ongoing operation. Later, she'd rendezvous with a contact in Washington where those papers would change hands. Aliyah was aware that threats came in all forms, sometimes wearing unsuspecting faces. At times, a single glance could expose malevolent intentions. It was why she didn't dismiss the flight attendant's stare. The woman in the navy blue uniform seemed rattled by Aliyah's mere presence. Aliyah had seen prejudice manifest in smaller ways, the pointed stares, the skeptical eyes, the abrupt shifts in posture when she passed by. None of it surprised her. She knew how bias could bubble beneath the surface, and she'd navigated these waters her entire life. Still, part of her wondered if the attendant's reaction was simply garden-variety bigotry. She hoped there wasn't more to it. As a CIA operative, caution was her constant companion. She had to be prepared for anything, especially if something so routine as a commercial flight could unravel her mission. No detail was too small to disregard. Her phone vibrated once. She glanced down to see a coded text from an unknown sender. "ETA remains the same. Meet at the usual place." She locked the screen, slipping the phone into her pocket, heart racing a fraction faster. Though her face remained impassive, her mind flickered through contingencies. The success of her mission hinged on her ability to remain invisible. If anyone recognized her or realized her significance, the entire operation could be jeopardized. An announcement over the PAR system signaled the start of boarding for first-class passengers. Aliyah had been granted a seat in business class, appropriate for her cover as a corporate lawyer traveling for an important conference. She had the credentials to back it up, as well as a credible personal history that passed thorough background checks. The CIA had left no stone unturned to provide her with an airtight cover. When the flight attendant Veronica reappeared at the desk to manage the boarding process, Aliyah felt that same odd friction fill the air. This time their eyes met more deliberately. Aliyah offered a polite nod, a fleeting smile that betrayed no emotions. Veronica glanced away, her lips pressed thin. In that moment, Aliyah felt her instincts flare. Something about Veronica's demeanor was tinged with hostility, a subtle but unmistakable tension that left Aliyah bracing for trouble. Veronica Myers had once thought of airline service as a glamorous career. Fresh out of college, she had fantasized about traveling the globe, enjoying scenic layovers, meeting interesting people. The reality had proven far more grueling. Over the years, she'd grown jaded, her wanderlust overtaken by corporate politics, obnoxious passengers, and the relentless fatigue that came from crossing time zones. Lately, however, her frustrations had acquired a sharper edge. She felt overlooked, taken for granted, even undermined. A string of personal and professional disappointments had left her feeling embittered. She'd caught wind that many flight attendants of her tenure were being laid off or reassigned to routes with worse hours and lower pay. Rumor had it that American West was trimming excess baggage. The mere possibility that her job could be in jeopardy made her anxious and defensive. Her lingering resentment had a way of coloring her interactions, especially when she felt challenged. That was exactly how she felt about the tall, poised black woman she'd locked eyes with earlier, Aliyah Washington. Veronica noticed on the manifest. The name printed on the first row of the passenger list evoked a surge of inexplicable annoyance. She told herself it was silly, but a smaller, darker part of her refused to let go. Every so often, Veronica succumbed to the silent biases that had been ingrained in her since childhood. She'd grown up in a homogeneous suburb, where diversity was seldom encountered. Although she rarely admitted it, any encounter with a self-assured person of color could trigger a defensive impulse within her. At times, she was barely aware of it. The reaction was subtle, nestled beneath layers of forced politeness, but it was there, influencing her thoughts and behavior. As she scanned the line of passengers waiting to board, Veronica caught a glimpse of Aaliyah again. The woman's stance radiated authority, and Veronica couldn't shake the feeling that Aaliyah was judging her. Before she could quell the sensation, it flared into a defensive scowl. She was used to dealing with difficult or entitled passengers, but something about this woman filled her with an urge to prove her own power. She rationalized her feelings by telling herself she was simply doing her job, upholding security protocols. If anything seemed amiss, she was duty-bound to report it. Yet deep inside, she knew she was conflating her personal insecurities with professional vigilance. It was a dangerous mixture. Veronica, a fellow flight attendant, Kyra, stepped toward her with a puzzled look. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Veronica answered hastily. She forced a bright smile. "Just making sure everyone's in the right zone for boarding." Kyra nodded and moved on, but not before giving Veronica a questioning glance. Veronica smoothed her uniform for the 100th time and took a steadying breath. Soon enough, the crowd began filtering onto the jet bridge, each passenger scanning their boarding passes. As Aaliyah approached, Veronica busied herself with the seat listings, determined not to make eye contact. Yet she couldn't resist a sidelong stare, an unspoken challenge lurking in her gaze. Little did she know, this moment of hostility would be the match that sparked an inferno, and she would soon find herself burning in its flames of consequence. Boarding progressed in an orderly fashion. Families with young children trickled in first, followed by frequent flyers, and finally the rest of economy class. Aaliyah Washington found her seat in business class, seat 4B, stowing her carry-on overhead and slipping into her plush aisle seat. Though outwardly composed, her mind was a whirlwind of strategies. She reminded herself that in this environment she was simply another passenger. Drawing attention to herself was not an option. Veronica patrolled the aisle, performing final checks and assisting passengers with stowing luggage. Her tone was polite but crisp, her forced smile unwavering. She tried to ignore the disquiet churning in her gut every time she passed Aaliyah's row. Something about the woman was unsettling, like a mirror reflecting Veronica's own insecurities. She tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered like a shadow. Overhead compartments clicked shut. The flight crew rattled off the standard safety announcements, encouraging seatbelts to be fastened and electronic devices to be placed in airplane mode. The hum of engines vibrated through the cabin as the plane began its slow taxi to the runway. Aaliyah settled in, her eyes scanning the emergency exits, mentally rehearsing the layout of the aircraft. Routine was comforting. She'd been trained to adapt to any scenario, from terrorist threats to medical emergencies. This flight, she hoped, would be uneventful, a bridge to her crucial assignment in Washington. But soon after takeoff, Veronica's actions took an odd turn. During the beverage service, she approached Aaliyah with an air of chilly courtesy. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her tone almost robotic. "Just water, please," Aaliyah responded politely. Veronica nodded, pouring the water from a small pitcher. As she handed it over, her grip faltered, and ice-cold water sloshed onto Aaliyah's tray table and partially onto her lap. Aaliyah gasped, quickly pulling back. The chill startled her, but she kept her composure. "I'm so sorry," Veronica said, though the apology sounded forced. She fumbled for napkins, pressing them to Aaliyah's seat and clothes. A tension flickered in Veronica's eyes, perhaps a mix of embarrassment and something else. Aaliyah could not be certain if the spill was accidental or deliberate. She could only note the rigid stance of the flight attendant, as though bracing for confrontation. "It's all right," Aaliyah said calmly, trying to diffuse any tension. Veronica gave a terse nod and hurried away, her cheeks aflame. Passengers nearby looked on with mild curiosity, but the moment passed quickly, overshadowed by the usual in-flight bustle. Yet for both women, the encounter lingered. Veronica felt humiliated by her clumsiness, blaming Aaliyah's presence for the surge of self-consciousness. Meanwhile, Aaliyah remained on alert, her instincts nagging that this was more than a mere accident. One misstep was no proof of malice, but her training told her not to dismiss coincidences, especially not on a mission as delicate as hers. High above the clouds, the seeds of conflict had been planted, and neither woman knew how explosive the harvest would be. Aaliyah tried to relax, focusing on the gentle drone of the engines. She discreetly reached into her blazer pocket, reassuring herself that the envelope was still there. It contained crucial documents detailing a corruption investigation involving a high-ranking foreign diplomat. The CIA needed to confirm certain alliances before forging forward with a broader international operation. Aaliyah's rendezvous in Washington was a pivotal step. Her thoughts drifted to her training at Camp Peary in Virginia, often referred to by insiders as the farm. She recalled rigorous drills, psychological evaluations, and the mental conditioning that prepared her for every kind of threat. Her instructors had emphasized that while technology and weapons were invaluable, the real game changer lay in the operative's ability to read human nature, to anticipate motives and manipulations. Over time, she'd mastered that skill, but it had come at the expense of a normal life. She sipped her water, mind still replaying the encounter with Veronica. The flight attendant's flustered apology, the tight-lipped expression something was off. Aaliyah told herself not to overreact. Sometimes people were simply rude or clumsy or both. Paranoia could be a silent killer in the field, but so could complacency. Scanning the other passengers, she noted a businessman engrossed in a spreadsheet on his laptop, a mother trying to calm a fussy toddler, and an older couple studying a guidebook for Washington's historic monuments. As far as she could tell, no one else aroused suspicion. Everything pointed to an ordinary flight, save for the uneasy sense that Veronica's hostility might rear its head again. Unbeknownst to Aaliyah, Veronica was making the rounds in the galley, her mind churning with resentment and irrational fear. The more she tried to compose herself, the more that single spilled drink replayed in her mind, fueling her frustration. Why had it happened in front of that passenger, the one who seemed to watch her every move? "Need a hand?" Kyra asked, noticing Veronica's agitation. "I'm good," Veronica snapped, then tried to soften her tone. "Sorry, just a bit on edge. Thanks anyway." Kyra nodded, obviously concerned. Over the past few months, she'd witnessed Veronica's mood swings intensify, especially under mounting stress. She decided it was best to give Veronica space for now. As the flight progressed, passengers settled into the routines of air travel, watching in-flight movies, dozing off, or reading. Aaliyah forced herself to read a magazine, if only to appear casual. She kept an eye on Veronica's movements, carefully noting any unusual behavior. Each time Veronica made eye contact, it felt like a silent charge passing between them. Aaliyah's every instinct roared for caution. Still, none of it made sense. A random flight attendant shouldn't pose a threat to her mission unless an unconnected twist of fate was about to meddle with her covert operation. Determined not to let Veronica's odd behavior derail her focus, Aaliyah reminded herself of her priorities: keep the documents safe, reach Washington, and rendezvous with her contact. Everything else was collateral, but sometimes it's the smallest of sparks that ignites the largest flames. Neither woman realized it yet, but the flight had already shifted onto a collision course with destiny. Lines were being drawn, tensions cemented. The storm cloud of conflict was gathering, and soon enough it would erupt in violence of more than one kind. Somewhere over the mid-western sky, turbulence jostled the aircraft. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, advising passengers to remain seated with their seatbelts securely fastened. Overhead lights flickered on, signaling the same. Flight attendants, too, were instructed to suspend the drink service and buckle up until the air cleared. Veronica secured herself in the nearest jump seat, tension etched into her face. She couldn't stop her mind from wandering to Aaliyah. Who is this woman, really? The question had been gnawing at her ever since boarding. Curiosity mixed with an undercurrent of bias, Veronica found herself both suspicious and resentful, though she kept telling herself she had no legitimate reason. The airline provided flight attendants with a handheld device that stored passenger lists, meal preferences, and other pertinent details. Veronica retrieved it from her pocket, scrolling through the names. There it was, Aaliyah Washington, seat 4B, business class, meal preference, vegetarian, nothing unusual. Next to Aaliyah's name, the system flagged no special notes, no wheelchair request, no unaccompanied minor status, no frequent flyer membership. Veronica frowned. She must not fly with us often. As the plane shook with another bout of turbulence, Veronica's thoughts spiraled. What if Aaliyah was involved in something illicit? Veronica had heard stories of drug smugglers who disguised themselves in fancy suits. Her best friend's sister, also a flight attendant, once encountered a passenger who tried to board with a stolen passport. Veronica's imagination soared. Could Aaliyah be some sort of criminal or con artist? The truth, of course, was far from what Veronica suspected, but she was poised on the edge of a dangerous assumption, and once her mind latched onto the idea, it became a reality she felt obligated to confirm. Meanwhile, Aaliyah stared out the window, the farmland thousands of feet below, reduced to patchwork squares. Her seatbelt harness snugly across her lap, she breathed deeply, steadying her nerves. One might think a CIA operative would be unfazed by turbulence, but Aaliyah would never claim to be superhuman. She was adept in many fields, yet still human enough to feel discomfort when the plane rocked unpredictably. She sensed eyes on her. Without turning, she knew Veronica was watching. The awareness prickled her spine. She wondered if her cover had slipped in some small way. Could Veronica suspect she wasn't who she claimed to be? That seemed improbable, but not impossible. Aaliyah vowed to remain on guard. After several minutes, the turbulence subsided, and the seatbelt sign flicked off. Veronica unclasped her belt and strode to the galley, searching for an outlet for her mounting suspicion. She decided to casually check overhead bins near Aaliyah's seat, ostensibly to see if anything needed rearranging. As she approached row 4, she noticed Aaliyah's carry-on bag. A wave of baseless suspicion coursed through Veronica, urging her to investigate. But rummaging through a passenger's belongings without cause was against protocol, not to mention illegal. Something held Veronica back for the moment. Still, the seeds of suspicion had been planted. Veronica's imagination now had free rein, and Aaliyah's innocence was about to be tested on the stage of Veronica's unfounded fears. Above the clouds, with nowhere to run, destiny quietly orchestrated the next act. The cabin lights dimmed as the captain announced the start of the in-flight meal service. Carts rattled down the aisles, flight attendants handing out trays of neatly packaged meals. Veronica approached business class with Kyra, distributing dishes to the passengers who had pre-ordered special meals. When Veronica stopped at Aaliyah's row, she carefully placed a vegetarian meal on her tray table. The tension between them was palpable, humming like a taut string. "Thank you," Aaliyah murmured, making a point to sound gracious. She wanted to diffuse any tension, uncertain why the flight attendant seemed so ill at ease. Veronica nodded stiffly, but a small scowl crossed her lips before she turned away. Aaliyah sipped her drink, curious about the hostility but unwilling to provoke anything. She'd learned over the years that responding to aggression with equal aggression seldom yielded good results, especially under the watchful eye of the public. As Veronica moved to the next row, she bumped into the elbow of an elderly gentleman. The tray of another passenger clattered, sending a hush through the immediate area. Embarrassed, she mumbled an apology and continued. In the galley, she exhaled sharply, dropping the polite facade for a moment. "Get it together, Veronica," she scolded herself. "You're acting like a rookie." She knew her composure was slipping, and for someone whose job relied on a calm demeanor, it was a distressing realization. What she couldn't see was the chain reaction happening in the seat behind her. A middle-aged woman with sharp features had watched the awkward scene intently. Her name was Yvonne Marsh, a seasoned traveler who prided herself on her knack for picking up gossip. She'd seen the tense interaction with the black woman in business class and smelled drama. Gossip, after all, was the in-flight entertainment no airline provided, but many passengers enjoyed. Yvonne caught Veronica's elbow. "Excuse me, miss," she whispered, adopting an air of confidentiality. "Is everything all right with that passenger?" She tilted her head toward Aaliyah's seat. Veronica froze. She could have dismissed the comment with a reassuring smile, but part of her was thrilled that someone else had noticed. It validated her suspicions, at least in her mind. "We're just keeping an eye on things," she said vaguely. It was enough to stoke Yvonne's curiosity further. Several rows back, Aaliyah picked up on the exchange. She saw Yvonne's intrusive glance and noted the quiet conversation that followed. Her stomach twisted with apprehension. She had done nothing wrong, yet the atmosphere was turning hostile. If Veronica's suspicions escalated, Aaliyah's covert identity might come under scrutiny. She couldn't afford that risk. Aaliyah decided to calmly finish her meal and then make a trip to the restroom, partly to clear her mind. She stood, adjusting the blazer she'd hung neatly on the back of her seat. Her heart pounded a little harder than usual, an occupational hazard of balancing secrecy in a high-profile environment. Sometimes, even the smallest incidents on a flight could spiral into major altercations. A spilled drink, a suspicious stare, an ill-timed bump of an elbow, trifles that, under the right conditions, could ignite a conflagration. And now, unbeknownst to most aboard, the fuse had already been lit. Aaliyah washed her hands in the cramped airplane lavatory, the hum of the plane's engines vibrating through the walls. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, mentally rehearsing how to remain composed if confronted again. She'd handle any situation with cool-headed professionalism, the same tactic she used whenever missions turned unpredictable. Once done, she slipped back into the aisle. As she returned to her seat, she noticed a sudden flurry of activity near her row. Veronica was rifling through an overhead bin with unusual urgency, while a few passengers craned their necks to watch. Aaliyah paused. Something about the scene felt wrong. No sooner had she taken a step closer than Veronica pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Her eyes went wide, and she let out a sharp gasp that caught the attention of everyone in the vicinity. She lifted the package as though it were a venomous snake. Aaliyah's heart seized. She had no knowledge of that package. She'd only brought a small black carry-on with clothes and essential electronics. This was in Miss Washington's bag, Veronica said, her voice quivering in false alarm. The quick glance she shot Aaliyah spoke volumes. A silent accusation passed between them, thick with implied guilt. Passengers around them exchanged uneasy glances. Someone murmured, "What's going on?" Another passenger shifted uncomfortably in their seat, eyeing Aaliyah suspiciously. Aaliyah stepped forward. "I have no idea what that is," she said, her voice calm but firm. She reached to open her carry-on compartment, but Veronica clutched the package protectively as though it was dangerous contraband. "You can't just go through my belongings," Aaliyah continued, careful to keep her tone level despite the surge of indignation. "If only she knew who I really am," Aaliyah thought. She braced herself, scanning the onlookers. The last thing she wanted was a full-blown scene, but it appeared one was brewing anyway. Kyra approached with confusion in her eyes. "Veronica, what's going on?" Veronica swallowed hard, casting a sidelong look at Yvonne Marsh, who was watching intently. "I received a tip that there might be something suspicious in Miss Washington's bag," Veronica said. It sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Aaliyah's mind whirred. A tip? From whom? She knew it was a fabrication, but how could she prove it right here, right now? "Let's remain calm," Aaliyah said, then turned to Kyra. "There's been a mistake. That package isn't mine. You're welcome to inspect my bag properly, with me present." She spoke clearly, offering transparency. Kyra hesitated, torn between procedure and the chaos unfolding. Meanwhile, Veronica seemed to be doubling down on her supposed find. A cynical observer might note that her entire body trembled with a mixture of fear and triumphant vindication, as though she'd discovered the villain in a detective novel. Other passengers grew uneasy, some shifting away from Aaliyah as though she might be a criminal. The tension was tangible, a living entity that thickened the air. Aaliyah locked her jaw, every instinct screaming that this was a blatant setup. But she could not reveal her CIA credentials in front of a plane full of strangers unless absolutely necessary. Thus, the seeds of fear and bigotry flourished into a dangerous lie. Veronica had crossed a line one she would soon find impossible to retreat from. The wheels of conflict were now fully in motion, propelling the flight toward an explosive confrontation none would soon forget. In the cramped space of the cabin, emotions ran high. Veronica clung to the package, looking every bit the righteous accuser. Passengers in nearby rows stared wide-eyed, whispering among themselves. A young father clutched his child closer, while a few rowdy teenagers craned for a better view, smartphones discreetly recording. Kyra, struggling to regain control, stepped between Veronica and Aaliyah. "We can't create a disturbance in the cabin," she hissed, voice pitched low. "Take this to the galley. Now." Veronica nodded stiffly, leading the way toward the curtained-off space at the front. Aaliyah followed, aware that every pair of curious eyes trailed them. The hush that settled over the cabin only magnified the tension. Behind the curtain, Veronica slammed the package onto a small counter. Kyra folded her arms, glaring at Veronica. "Explain," she demanded. "What exactly is going on?" Veronica shot a glance at Aaliyah. "I found this in Miss Washington's carry-on," she repeated, though she refused to meet Aaliyah's gaze directly. "It's heavy. Could be something dangerous. Drugs. Maybe worse." Aaliyah felt her temper flare, but she maintained the disciplined composure she'd cultivated over years of training. She looked at Kyra. "I have never seen that package before," she said succinctly. "It wasn't in my bag when I left home. This is a setup." Kyra's gaze darted between them, desperate for a rational explanation. "Veronica, you know our protocol," she said, tone brisk. "If you suspect contraband, you notify the head purser and the captain. You don't just pull it out in front of everyone." Veronica's face flushed. She realized she'd overstepped, but backing down now felt like surrendering her pride. I thought it was urgent," she stammered, her composure showing cracks. "And who gave you this tip?" Aaliyah asked, folding her arms. Her voice held an edge of restrained anger. "Because I certainly didn't see anyone rummaging in my things. Aside from you." Veronica faltered. She couldn't very well say she'd conjured the suspicion out of thin air. Yvonne's inquisitive whisper hardly qualified as a legitimate tip, but she doubled down. "A passenger said they noticed suspicious behavior." She lied, avoiding Aaliyah's eyes. Kyra sighed heavily. "Let's not escalate. We need to inform the captain immediately. That's the procedure. Miss Washington, please stay calm and return to your seat for now. We'll sort this out properly." Aaliyah gave a terse nod, every muscle coiled. Without another word, she returned to her seat, aware that the entire cabin was watching. She kept her expression neutral, her heart pounding. The documents in her inside pocket felt heavier than ever. She risked losing everything if she was detained or if Veronica's scheme spun out of control. Veronica looked at Kyra, desperation creeping into her eyes. "I swear, I was doing what I thought was right." Kyra shook her head in disbelief. "You've started a fire, Veronica," she said quietly. "You better hope it doesn't burn down this entire flight." In that moment, Veronica felt the weight of her actions. Unwittingly, she'd sparked a confrontation with consequences far beyond a typical cabin conflict. The price of her impulse would soon exact a steep toll, one that would reverberate through the rest of the flight and far beyond the final landing. Several rows away, hidden behind tinted sunglasses, sat a passenger who had been monitoring the unfolding drama with heightened interest. His name was Roberto Palacios, an off-duty TSA officer traveling home to visit family. He often recognized trouble before it turned into an official incident, and his instincts told him something wasn't adding up. He'd watched the flight attendant's unsubtle hostility toward the black woman, observed the suspicious unveiling of the brown package, and heard the hushed accusations. In his professional capacity, he knew there were protocols for such discoveries. Procedures weren't being followed. This felt more like a personal vendetta. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the captain was summoned by the head purser. He was briefed on the situation. A package allegedly found in a passenger's carry-on, claims of suspicious behavior, and a potential security concern. The captain's brow furrowed as he listened. He gave the standard directive. The flight attendant who discovered the item should secure it. They would contact authorities on the ground to handle the matter upon landing. Under no circumstances should the flight be disrupted beyond maintaining safety. As the minutes ticked by, a stifling tension gripped the cabin. Aaliyah sat with her seatbelt buckled, posture rigid, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She was aware that many sets of eyes darted to her, then quickly away. She exhaled through her nose, trying to calm herself, all the while formulating possible escape routes. If she were detained, she'd have to reveal her CIA status to the authorities, but doing so mid-flight in front of random witnesses was out of the question. Her mission was too critical for that level of exposure. In the galley, Veronica stared at the brown package, her mind racing. Kyra had marched off to speak with the head purser again, leaving Veronica alone with her thoughts. Have I gone too far? Fear churned in her stomach, but a stubborn voice in her head insisted that she'd done the right thing in rooting out potential danger. She reached out and touched the edge of the wrapping. What if it really is something illegal? That possibility still existed, though even she recognized how improbable it was. She peeled back a small corner of the wrapping, revealing a glint of metal within. Her eyes widened, adrenaline spiking. She carefully wrapped it again, heart pounding. It could be anything. Her fear escalated, conjuring wild images of contraband or even a weapon. But as self-doubt crept in, another emotion rose to counter it: anger. She was angry at Aaliyah for exuding that unflappable composure, for making Veronica feel small and insecure. Anger at the airline's management for putting her in a high-stress environment. Anger at herself for allowing her own biases to spin out of control. Yet it was too late for regret. The wheels had been set in motion. Soon the flight would land, and official protocols would dictate a search and questioning. If Aaliyah truly was innocent, the truth would come out. But at what cost? Veronica shuddered at the realization that she might have triggered a chain reaction that would be nearly impossible to stop. Unbeknownst to her, Aaliyah had already decided to take control of her own fate before anyone else decided it for her. With 2 hours left until landing, the cabin lights dimmed once more for passengers to rest or watch in-flight entertainment. The turbulence had passed, but the unease lingered like a persistent storm cloud. Veronica attempted to carry on with her duties, but she could barely manage a cursory smile. She felt as if every pair of eyes judged her, condemning her for the spectacle she'd created. In her seat, Alia devised a plan. She would wait until the flight neared Washington, then quietly signal her CIA contact on the ground to prepare for a discreet intervention. Her priority was to preserve her cover, but if forced, she would reveal her credentials to the local authorities. That last resort, however, could jeopardize the entire operation. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. Sensing the tension, several passengers tried to busy themselves with movies or music. Roberto Palacios, the off-duty TSA officer, observed everything calmly. He considered approaching the flight attendant, but reasoned that interfering might complicate matters. However, he kept his phone's camera on standby, ready to document any violations of passenger rights or misconduct. Veronica's mind churned with guilt and defiance. She replayed a mental loop of the moment she found the package, scouring her memory for anything that could validate her suspicion. But she came up blank. The impetus had been a simple tip from a passenger who'd voiced curiosity, hardly grounds for rummaging through someone's bag. Her conscience nagged at her, telling her she'd done something morally wrong, even if she'd tried to justify it as vigilance. Finally, the captain's voice broke over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our initial descent into Washington, D.C. shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your belongings are stowed. Flight attendants will come through the cabin one last time to collect any remaining service items." Alia's pulse quickened. She discreetly palmed her phone, typed a short, coded message to her contact. "Prepare to intercept at arrival. Potential conflict. More details soon." She sent it, switched off her phone, and tucked it away. Her stomach churned with a mixture of stress and adrenaline. She never liked operations that spiraled beyond her control. Meanwhile, Veronica received instructions from the head purser that airport security would be waiting at the gate to handle the situation. A wave of dread washed over her. She realized that once the plane landed, her hasty actions would be scrutinized not just by her superiors, but by law enforcement. And what if the package turned out to be harmless? She pictured the consequences: disciplinary action, lawsuits, even losing her job. Yet she'd come this far, and turning back was impossible. She went through the motions of the final cabin check, eyes carefully avoiding Alia's. The silence between them was fraught, an invisible barrier that spoke volumes. Soon the plane descended through the cloud cover, the lights of the city below twinkling like a vast constellation. Alia's eyes were fixed on the window, mentally preparing herself for what awaited. She could sense the shift in cabin pressure, the quickening in her own heartbeat. Almost there, she told herself. Just keep your cool. None of them, neither Veronica, Alia, nor the other curious passengers, realized how thoroughly fate had woven their paths together. The landing would be a threshold, a gateway through which truth and consequences would collide with Earth, shattering force. The aircraft touched down at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport with a squeal of tires and a shudder through the fuselage. Passengers breathed a collective sigh of relief, eager to disembark and continue their journeys. But for Alia, Veronica, and a handful of others, this was only the beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C., the captain announced over the PAR. For your safety, please remain seated until we reach the gate and the fasten seatbelt sign is turned off. Thank you for flying with American West." Alia felt her phone buzz gently, her contact responding with confirmation. She exhaled, bracing for what would come next. Outside, airport security officials were assembling in a quiet cluster near the jet bridge, alerted to a possible incident on board. Among them, standing at a careful distance, was an undercover CIA liaison, wearing a generic suit and an official airport badge clipped to his belt. Once the plane taxied to the gate and the seatbelt sign blinked off, the cabin erupted in the usual flurry of activity. Overhead bins popped open, passengers pulled out carry-ons, and many stretched their legs, impatient to exit. But the forward door remained conspicuously closed, as Veronica and the head purser communicated with the ground staff. Soon, two uniformed airport police officers stepped aboard, joined by a supervisor from the airline. Whispers spread through the cabin like wildfire. A few passengers fidgeted, while others pulled out phones to discreetly record. Aaliyah rose from her seat calmly, meeting the officials halfway down the aisle. Veronica hovered nearby, the package clutched in her hand. Her face was ashen with stress, and her hands trembled slightly. "Miss Washington?" one officer asked, reading from a note. "We need to ask you a few questions." Aaliyah nodded, her expression neutral. "I understand." She was guided toward the front of the plane, where the rest of the passengers could overhear but not fully see what was unfolding. The officer gestured at the brown wrapped package. "It's been alleged this was found in your carry-on. Do you have any knowledge of it?" "No," Aaliyah replied firmly. "I have never seen it before. I believe I was set up by this flight attendant." She gestured toward Veronica, who bristled. "Ma'am, please," Veronica interjected. "I found it myself in the overhead bin with her bag. It was suspicious. Did you have a warrant?" Aaliyah shot back. "Permission to search? Or any probable cause beyond your own prejudice?" The stark accusation hung in the air, sending a murmur through the onlookers. Veronica opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The officer lifted a hand, silencing any back and forth. "We'll handle this in a secured area," he said, nodding to his partner. They escorted Aaliyah off the plane, followed by Veronica, the airline supervisor, and the head purser. Meanwhile, the rest of the passengers slowly trickled out behind them, a buzz with rumors and speculation. Little did Veronica realize, the next few moments would lay bare the full truth, not just about the mysterious package, but about the undercover identity she had so recklessly threatened. Destiny had led them to this face-off, and only cold, hard facts would triumph over baseless suspicion. At the gate area, a cordoned-off section had been set up by airport security. Uniformed officers and airline representatives hovered, wary of the spectacle, drawing too large a crowd. Aaliyah and Veronica stood on opposite sides, tension coiled between them like a drawn bow. "All right, let's see what's inside," the officer in charge commanded, gesturing to the package. A technician stepped forward with gloved hands, carefully cutting away the brown paper. Inside was a small, rectangular metal box. Silence engulfed the onlookers. Veronica's eyes darted nervously. "If it's contraband, at least I'm vindicated," she reasoned, her pulse hammering in her ears. The technician pried open the lid, revealing a neatly arranged set of antique cutlery. Spoons, forks, knives, each piece intricately decorated with ornate designs, likely of historical or collector's value. No drugs, no weapons, no bomb, nothing more sinister than a meal service from a bygone era. A collective exhale rippled through the crowd. A flush of embarrassment crept up Veronica's cheeks. The lead officer raised an eyebrow at her. "You said you had cause to believe this was illicit." Veronica stammered. "I didn't know. It seemed suspicious, and I thought I was only trying to keep the flight safe." Aaliyah stepped forward, voice calm and resolute. "Officer, as I stated, that's not my property. I have no knowledge of how it ended up near my bag." She turned to Veronica. "You planted this, didn't you?" The question hung, and a hush fell over the room. Veronica opened her mouth, desperate to refute the accusation, but she looked around and realized she had no solid defense. Her motives, whether fueled by bias or misguided suspicion, had no factual basis. She'd broken protocol, rummaged through a passenger's belongings, and falsely accused someone of a crime. Before the officer could respond, a man in a plain suit stepped forward. He flashed identification at the authorities, who nodded, stepping aside. He approached Aaliyah with quiet confidence. "Ma'am, I believe we have some matters to discuss privately. Please follow me." Veronica watched, puzzled. The plain-suited man then whispered something to the lead officer, who nodded and spoke aloud. "Miss Washington, we need to verify a few details. You're not under arrest, but we'd like you to come with us for a routine inquiry." Aaliyah glanced at the man in the suit, her CIA liaison. She realized the plan was in motion, her agency stepping in to protect her. She nodded, stepping away from the circle. Veronica felt confusion swirl. Who is she really? The question stabbed her conscience. She looked at the airline supervisor, who wore a thunderous expression. "Veronica, we will have to file an official report. This is a serious breach of conduct," he said. "For now, you're relieved of duty." Her world tilted. She wanted to protest, to justify herself. Instead, all she could do was stare at the antique cutlery that had shattered her illusions of heroism. A wave of dread crashed over her, realization dawning that she had gone far beyond an innocent mistake. She had deliberately targeted a passenger based on unsubstantiated biases, and now the consequences were about to descend. Time seemed to slow as Aaliyah accompanied the CIA liaison to a secure office within the airport. The flurry of the terminal noise receded behind them. She felt immense relief that her agency contact had intervened before matters escalated further. Though the situation was still precarious, she trusted the system she served. Behind closed doors, Aaliyah presented her covert credentials to the proper authorities. Officials from both the CIA and airport security swiftly confirmed her identity and mission. The tension in the room eased, replaced by professional courtesy. Her liaison apologized for the inconvenience, but they needed to complete the formalities. If needed, they would coordinate with the local FBI office, though no charges would be pressed against Aaliyah once her status was confirmed. Meanwhile, in a starkly lit interrogation room, Veronica sat alone at a metal table, her uniform feeling foreign on her skin. The airline supervisor had insisted on a thorough review of her actions. She was no longer simply a flight attendant who'd made an error in judgment. She was now the subject of a potential misconduct investigation, one that could lead to termination or even legal consequences. Her mind raced over the day's events, the web of lies and suspicions she'd spun. She thought about the moment she'd decided to rummage through Aaliyah's carry-on, how she'd let her insecurities and deep-seated prejudices override her duty to treat passengers fairly. The humiliating truth was inescapable. She had framed an innocent woman. And not just any woman, an undercover CIA agent, no less. The magnitude of her mistake felt insurmountable. Her career, her livelihood, her reputation, everything hung in the balance. The door opened, and the airline supervisor entered with two officials. Their eyes were grim, reflecting the seriousness of the situation. No one spoke for a long moment. "We've received statements from passengers, and we've reviewed the preliminary details," the supervisor began. "Veronica, this is a severe breach of protocol and ethics. We'll conduct a formal investigation, and you're suspended without pay, effective immediately." Veronica's throat went dry. She had prepared for the worst, yet hearing the words spoken aloud tore at her composure. She tried to muster a defense, but the logic fell apart in her mind. She knew she had no ground to stand on. Hard karma had arrived, slamming into her life like a force of nature. The weight of her actions was undeniable. Her illusions of righteous vigilance lay shattered. The simmering prejudice she'd harbored and the fear-driven impulse to frame Aaliyah had now circled back, crushing her under the consequences. Outside, the terminal bustled as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Luggage wheeled by, children asked for snacks, and overhead screens announced departing flights. For Veronica, however, the world had irrevocably changed. She emerged from the interrogation room with slumped shoulders, carrying a box of her personal items from the airline. The future stretched before her like a desolate road, lined with regret. Aaliyah, after completing the necessary paperwork, left the secure office in her own time. She spotted Veronica being escorted away, uniforms on each side. Their eyes met for an instant, a fleeting moment of silent acknowledgement. Aaliyah felt a flicker of compassion, though she would never condone Veronica's actions. The agent in her recognized that prejudice was often rooted in ignorance and fear forces that inevitably destroy those who wield them. Thus ended their shared ordeal, but the consequences would ripple for long after. Aaliyah continued on her mission, the crucial documents delivered as planned. Veronica faced the consequences of her reckless hate, forced to confront the wreckage of her choices. Karma, as always, had the final say. When fate intertwines the paths of two strangers, hidden motives have a way of surfacing under the harsh light of truth. For Aaliyah Washington, her unwavering composure and clandestine training brought justice to a situation fueled by prejudice. For Veronica Myers, her fear and bias led her down a dark path of deception, ending in a harsh confrontation with karma. Yet, even amid chaos, lessons can be learned, ignorance can be dismantled, and accountability, though painful, can pave the road to redemption. If this gripping tale of high-altitude deceit and swift, unyielding karma resonated with you, we invite you to support the channel. Like this video to spread awareness about standing up against injustice. Share it with friends who appreciate stories of redemption and retribution. And be sure to subscribe for more riveting narratives that reveal the hidden depths of human character. Your engagement helps us bring you more compelling stories. Thank you for watching.